Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with pork recipe fail. That's right, don't let this beautiful picture fool you. This recipe was not good, but instead of hiding my shame, I've decided to show you what happened. And I'm doing that for two very specific groups of fans. The first of which realize this is a great learning experience, learning from others' mistakes. And the second group who get a sadistic joy from watching other people suffer and fail. Which is fine, that's basically why I watch C-SPAN. But anyway, here's what I did, and here's what happened. So I started off by seasoning a nice, fully trimmed, boneless pork loin roast. And of course, that was with salt and freshly ground black pepper on both sides. And then I went ahead and browned it in a heavy-duty skillet with a little bit of vegetable oil over high heat, which, as you know, is fairly standard about to roast a big hunk of meat procedure. So I browned it up nicely, and at this point, everything was looking amazing. I was pretty psyched. And once it was browned, I removed it from the pan. I turned the heat down to medium, and I quickly tossed in a sliced shallot along with a giant pinch of salt and some butter. And I proceeded to saute these shallots on medium for a few minutes until they started to turn translucent. And at that point, I made my first of several major errors. I threw in some rosemary, but not a little rosemary, a ton of rosemary. That was way too much rosemary. And did I realize it at the time? No, because watch this. I added more. And to make things worse, I'm actually giving it a little saute in that hot fat, which is going to extract even more extra rosemary flavor. So basically my sauce was ruined at this point, but I didn't know it. So I went ahead and threw in my whole green grapes, which I've always wanted to try roasting with some pork. I actually saw it done with a whole fish one time, and I thought it looked pretty cool. So I stirred in a handful of whole green grapes. Those are seedless, of course. And at that point, I preheated my oven to 325. I made a space, and I returned my nicely browned pork loin roast back to the pan. And then once that oven was hot, I went ahead and popped it in and cooked it at 325 for about a half hour, 35 minutes, or until it reached an internal temperature of about 140, 145. And when we took it out, it looked like this. And I know, it doesn't look that bad. That's what made this all so much worse. And of course, we're always going to remove our meat from the pan to let it rest while we make our pan sauce. So that's what we did here. And of course, a piece of meat that size, you want to give it at least 10, 15 minutes to rest. And while that was happening, we went back over to the stove, we put our pan back on medium heat, and as I was looking at this, getting ready to deglaze it, I thought to myself, you know what this needs? Another pinch of rosemary. Oh yeah, I inexplicably added more rosemary. By the way, no, I was not drunk making this recipe. I wish I had that excuse. So I stirred that in, which brings us to my next major mistake. Instead of deglazing with a nice rich chicken stock, I used water. I got fooled by the fond. Oh yeah, fooled by the fond. I profoundly overestimated how delicious and flavorful all those caramelized shallots and pan drippings at the bottom were. I figured that stuff was going to be so flavorful that all I would need was a little splash of water. Oh, I was so wrong. But anyway, I stirred that in, I soldiered on, I turned up the heat so we could reduce it down like we always do for these kind of pan sauces. And as it reduced and as I started tasting it, I realized I had major issues. Not only was that rosemary flavor killing everything else in the sauce, but above and beyond the rosemary flavor, the sauce was so flat, so one-dimensional, I started to panic. So I ran to the fridge, I threw in a little splash of cream, which totally made things much better, and by much better, I mean a lot worse. I still had a really flat one-dimensional sauce that all you could taste was rosemary, but now was just slightly richer and more caloric, without improving the flavor at all. But anyway, I continued reducing to an appropriate consistency, and since we were hungry and I'd put all this effort into it, I decided to serve it anyway. So I spooned that sauce over my pork, which by the way was cooked unbelievably perfect. And as I took the first bite here, I was thinking, maybe you just tasted the sauce so many times you just think it's horrible. So I took a bite, and I realized, no, that's not the case. It really was that bad, borderline inedible sauce. But like I said, the pork was perfect. And I was able to test my theory that roasted whole green grapes would be good with pork, which it was, except it only was if you cut little pieces of grape and ate it with the pork, which some of your lazier guests may not do. So we may have to rethink how we do the grapes. But anyway, the grapes were a very minor issue when you compare them to the major mistakes I made herein. But anyway, time to wrap this up. This self-flagellation is exhausting. So I really hope you don't give this a try. Head over to foodwishes.com where you'll see no ingredient amounts, but you will see more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.